Hi, my name is Jimena Sanchez, and this is my final presentation for the Capstone project titled Manosphere Mobilization, Andrew Tate, Hypermasculinity, and the Digital Right. A little bit about this case. It will be about the digital mobilization of young men in the United Kingdom and in the United States who are influenced by Andrew Tate's ideologies that are rooted in anti-feminism, masculinity, and misogyny. The main argument is that young men in the UK and the US are using digital spaces to mobilize around Andrew Tate's ideologies. These young men are creating online spaces such as the Red Pill community and the Manosphere to uphold anti-feminist ideas and reject progressive values. A little bit about the case background. Like I said, the countries that I will be focusing on are the UK and the US, given their very similar patterns of young men following Andrew Tate and his platform. The main person that the case is about Andrew Tate, who is a self-proclaimed misogynist from Romania, but his platform and ideologies have spread worldwide. The core ideologies have to do with hypermasculinity, misogyny, and anti-feminism. The target audience for Andrew Tate are young men aged 18 through 29, and we will see this age range come up multiple times throughout the presentation. Last but not least, the online platforms used in order to allow for the dissemination of Andrew Tate's ideologies to happen are TikTok, Reddit, and X, among others, but these are the main ones. I'd like to give a little theoretical context before jumping into the analysis of youth political participation. Later in the presentation, I will talk about cultural toolkits, hegemonic masculinity, the framing process, political socialization, effective politics, and networked misogyny. However, to start off, I'd like to jump into analyzing the youth political participation within this movement, and I look at the following sources: social media posts, an interview conducted with an Andrew Tate supporter and posted on The Guardian, a survey on Britain's views on Andrew Tate, a survey on Americans' views on feminism and male discrimination, and also an analysis of the US government's reaction to Andrew Tate's criminal charges and his presence in the US. To start off, here is the social media post, which was added on X, and this was posted on May 3rd of this year. And basically, it is a video of a young man saying that Andrew Tate saved him from becoming trans. And there are men in the comments who approve of the message that the video is spreading, and they say things like, "Love to him. You made the difference, G. This dude was saved for life. I am so happy to see this." Clearly, there is a sense of community building happening around the idea that Andrew Tate saved someone from being trans, and this community begins to um, build on the other aspects of Andrew Tate, such as anti-feminism and rejection of the LGBTQ plus community. This next piece talks about the interview that was posted on The Guardian, which has to do with a journalist interviewing Ennis, who is the Andrew Tate supporter. Throughout the interview, Ennis was stating that he does not support and believe in all of Andrew Tate's ideologies. However, at one point during the interview, he looked directly at the camera and said, "You women out there, you like a man who's controlling, and you know that." This is concerning because there is this clear capture of the ideas that Andrew Tate is spreading. However, some people like Ennis don't realize that they are beginning to think the same way as Andrew Tate, which can be very harmful to the ways that they vote in the future or what they choose to support, especially if it's around gender roles and feminism, because they will go with what they have seen on these online platforms and what is being pushed out by Andrew Tate. Next, I'd like to talk about this survey, which is the Americans' views on feminism and male discrimination. The two graphs over here on the right, They talk a bit about the male discrimination and whether or not men are feminists. The graph on the top shows how men aged 18 through 29 say that there is some or a lot of discrimination against men in American society and how this has grown from 2019 to 2023. And the graph below shows how most Gen Z men say that they are not feminists. And this can come from the same idea that they believe men are not being treated the way that they should be treated, and the overall perception that men have of how they are treated directly impacts what they believe about feminism and all the waves that it has evolved through. It is important to not assign direct correlation to this idea, though, because just because a man is not a feminist does not believe that he is not a feminist because of Andrew Tate. There obviously are other factors in their lives that influence this belief, but Andrew Tate's presence on social media could have a very big impact on this belief. This next survey talks about Britain's views on Andrew Tate, and it shows how, in general, men have more positive views of Andrew Tate than women do, and especially those men aged 18 through 29. They strongly believe that they agree with his views, as we can see on the graph to the left, and this impacts youth political participation because the way that they absorb the ideas and ideology spread by Andrew Tate ultimately impacts whether they are agreeing with certain policies being pushed out in the real world of politics when it comes time to vote for these platforms. The next piece that I would like to highlight is this news clip from the New York Post, which talks about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis warning Andrew Tate and his brother to not appear in the Sunshine State because they're not welcome after they left Romania due to a criminal case against them, which has to do with rape. And this truly reveals Tate's digital influence in the realm of political consequences and how his story does have very real legal, political, and social effects. As for the theoretical discussion, I will be talking about, as I mentioned earlier, Ann Swidler's cultural toolkit, Connell's hegemonic masculinity concept, Almeida's framing process, and I will also talk about political socialization, affective politics, and networked misogyny. To start off, I'd like to connect this case back to Ann Swidler's cultural toolkits cultural toolkit, because a cultural toolkit is defined as a style or set of skills and habits rather than a set of prefers or wants. So this is basically the worldviews, symbols, and habits that enable a person to stay within a platform. The worldviews that Andrew Tate pushes out have to do with anti-feminism, hustle culture, and anti-woke ideologies. And some of the symbols that he uses to draw in support are being a high value man, an alpha male, or a top G, and the habits that allow his followers to continue to be a part of his world and the manosphere are rejecting mainstream media as well as mocking and harassing feminists. And this overall connects to youth political participation because when a person is enabled to have a cultural toolkit, they can then use these to act politically in the future when it comes time to vote. And they will think about the symbols and worldviews and habits that they have been developing through being in the manosphere or in a red pill community in order to make their voting decisions. Next, I'd like to talk about R.W. Connell's hegemonic masculinity theory. This concept is defined as the pattern of practice that allowed men's dominance over women to continue. I think that this concept very clearly connects to Andrew Tate and his manosphere world because he constantly pushes on the idea that men have more power over women. And this instills the idea in many people's minds that masculinity, especially toxic masculinity, is the hegemonic gender role, and this does not allow women to break out of the patriarchal society that we live in and has been built for us. This affects youth political participation because when it comes time to vote or enable their own political behaviors, they will, the people in these communities will choose to vote for platforms that continue to push the idea forward that hegemonic masculinity is the only way to live. The next theory that I would like to talk about is Paul Almeida's framing process. The definition of the framing process is how movement leaders such as Andrew Tate actively convey grievances to larger audiences, such as the grievance that men are not being treated as they should be treated by women and by others. And this is how they draw in more support for the movement and maintain commitments from the movement participants. Those who choose to participate in the manosphere and red pill community, they know that they are going into these spaces because they feel that their masculinity is under attack and they need to join a community in order to ensure that they continue to be the version of a male that is respected by women and that they are not seen as weak and as emotional creatures. And this concept connects to youth political participation because the participants in the movement, they will frame their ideals around um, not around masculinity as under attack, and they will again choose to vote for platforms and support movements and political leaders that they feel best fit their own commitments as the participants in this toxic masculinity and hypermasculine movement. I will also talk about political socialization. The article that I chose to read for this talked about how as they continued to analyze the political beliefs of people over their lives, they realized that 40% changed their basic response as to what they identified as politically. And this is important to this case because young men's minds are very malleable at ages of 18 through 29. And this means that Andrew Tate is taking advantage of this malleability in order to shape their political beliefs into what he thinks are the the right ways to look at masculinity and gender roles. I will also like to bring up affective politics, and this has to do with how Andrew Tate uses emotions as a political tool, such as anger, resentment, and frustration, because this allows for emotional bonds to be created among those who are a part of the manosphere. And the homosocial affective currencies, which are humor and shared resentment, they allow for successful community building activities to happen, such as rejecting progressive norms, because they established a strong definition of toxic masculinity when they generated solidarity among the idea that that men are no longer being respected. And this connects to youth political participation because men will choose to vote and enable their voting behavior around platforms that best follow what they have been following through with Andrew Tate and his own Manosphere platform. Additionally, I'd also like to touch on networked misogyny, which is the systemic hostility that thrives in online spaces. Andrew Tate uses the online algorithms to spread his misogynistic beliefs in these digital safe spaces, which are fertile grounds for reactionary politics and networked misogyny to thrive in. This affects youth political participation because men might not even choose to politically engage in the real world because they feel a sense of community and certain political beliefs already being built in these digital safe spaces. To conclude this presentation, I think it is clear that young men are becoming mobilized through digital spaces that reinforce misogyny, hypermasculinity, and they are led to believe that they must reject the progressive values that have been being built in society. The next point is that Andrew Tate's influence is structured and well planned out through affective strategies and ensuring that the stages of political socialization of young men are still malleable. In addition, I think it's important to realize that ignoring this trend does have political consequences because this does impact voting and political behavior and it shifts beliefs around gender roles. Again, I would like to say that correlation is not causation, and Andrew Tate is not the only reason why we are seeing the shift toward the right among men, because there are other factors in their life which could easily influence them. As for my own personal reflection, I would like to become more critical about the media that I consume. I would not, I would also like to realize how digital spaces are not the place to underestimate their ability because they can definitely shape political identity. And also, I would like to have conversations with the young men in my life about their digital presence, who they follow, and why they are following them and how this is impacting their own political beliefs. I think that one way to counteract this movement and trend that we're seeing is by talking to these young men and getting a better understanding of how they feel. This is my works cited. Works cited continued. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.